Why is my father's ledger hidden behind this rusted lock? The rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof of the blacksmith shop, forming a percussion that seemed to echo the emptiness in her own life. She stood in the muddy lot, one hand gripping the warped door handle, the other clutching a thin, folded deed that had survived more years of neglect than her hope of ever feeling safe again. This was her father's forgotten workshop, coated in rust and dust, abandoned by the town and dismissed by everyone else. Yet inside that tool chest lay something she needed. A small leather-bound ledger, its edges frayed, that might be the only proof left of everything her family had tried to erase. The wind gusted through a broken window, scattering a few loose nails across the floor, and she felt the weight of a lifetime of decisions pressing down on her shoulders. 3 days earlier, she had been pacing the narrow hallway of her apartment, $217 in her checking account, a stack of overdue medical bills threatening to tip her over the edge, and a single cardboard box containing the remnants of her father's legacy. A hammer with a splintered handle, a bent ruler, a rusted file that had survived decades in the back of a drawer. Her car, a 2003 Ford Explorer with a cracked windshield and a stubborn brake light, sat outside, its engine coughing reluctantly each time she turned the key. She had no family to call, no one checking in, just a folder of divorce papers, a bag of prescription bottles, and the smell of damp wood from the apartment above. She had walked into the rain-soaked parking lot clutching the deed like a lifeline, listening to the drizzle drip through the gaps in the building's eaves, the metal of the old gate groaning as though warning her to turn back. Every step toward the shop's entrance was measured, deliberate. Her legs trembled, but her fingers didn't let go of the document. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and dust motes danced in the dim light, the floor littered with scraps of iron and forgotten tools. The tool chest sat in the corner, chained shut, layers of grime and rust hiding what she instinctively knew had been left there for her. She knelt, brushing a puddle of water from the floor, and set the deed beside her on a rotting workbench. Something about the chest seemed alive, as if it was waiting. Then, as her gloved hand traced the outline of the lock, a small piece of parchment slipped out from underneath the chain, soaked at the edges but still legible, bearing her father's initials and a single line. Not everything is as it seems. Her breath caught. This tiny, overlooked note, damp and fragile, felt like a whispered warning and an invitation. The note in her hand was still damp, the ink slightly bleeding into the fibers like it had been written in a hurry decades ago, and for a moment she didn't move, only listened to the rain hitting the roof harder, as if the building itself was trying to speak back to her. Not everything is as it seems. The words didn't comfort her. They tightened something inside her chest. 3 days earlier, that same tightness had already become her normal. She had been sitting on the edge of a narrow motel bed off Highway 18, staring at a cracked phone screen showing $211.43 in her checking account, the number so small it felt like it didn't belong to an adult life at all. On the chair beside her, a stack of unopened envelopes leaned dangerously. Final notices from the hospital, a utility shut-off warning, and a thin white eviction letter folded so many times the paper had begun to tear at the creases. Her landlord had already taped a second notice to the door downstairs. 48 hours to vacate. No discussion, no extension, just a polite sentence that erased her entire remaining space in the world. She had tried calling the county disability office that morning, holding the phone against her ear while sitting in her old Ford Explorer because the motel Wi-Fi kept dropping. The call ended with a soft apology and a long silence that meant nothing would change. Her prescription bag sat on the passenger seat, 2 bottles half full, 1 nearly empty, and she had counted the pills without meaning to, like counting them could stretch time. When she finally stepped out of the vehicle, the parking lot gravel crunched under her weight, each step uneven, her left leg still aching, from the injury that had ended her work at the fabrication shop years ago. Inside the motel room, the heater clicked on and off like it couldn't decide whether she deserved warmth. A framed painting of a lake hung crooked on the wall, its glass cracked like a fault line. She packed slowly, not because she had much left, but because every object carried weight she could not afford to drop. A folded photo of her father at the forge. A rusted wrench he once told her never to throw away. A key with no label that she had kept for reasons she could no longer explain. When she checked out, the clerk didn't look up from the register. He slid the receipt across the counter with 2 fingers, like it might stain him. Outside, her Ford Explorer coughed again when she turned the ignition, the engine refusing to fully commit to running. She rested her forehead on the steering wheel for a moment, not crying, just breathing through the noise of everything collapsing slowly around her. Then she drove anyway because there was nowhere else to go. And now, standing in the blacksmith shop with rainwater pooling at her boots, she realized something worse than losing everything. She had come here not because she believed in hope, but because there was nothing left to lose. A sudden gust pushed through the broken side window, fluttering a loose stack of old receipts on the workbench. One of them slid off and landed near her foot, and when she bent to pick it up, she saw a stamped parcel number at the bottom. Fresh ink, different from the faded records around it, as if someone had recently checked this place in the system. And beneath it, barely visible through the smudge of time, was a second name written over the original owner's line, crossed out but not fully erased. Someone had been here long after her father was gone, and they had tried to rewrite the truth. The county auction hall smelled of damp paper and mildew. The folding chairs lined up like an army of ghosts waiting for something no one wanted. The blacksmith shop was listed as parcel 47-092, sold as is, with unpaid property taxes for nearly a decade, the auctioneer's voice cutting through the room. Rusted, abandoned, unsafe structure. Minimum bid, $500. A few developers shifted in their suits, barely raising their hands, their eyes on more profitable lots. One man whispered to his colleague, "Why waste time on that dump?" Her hands tightened around the folded deed and the crumpled $211 in her wallet. Every single dollar a reminder that this might be her last chance. She stepped forward as the auctioneer called out, "Going once, going twice," and lifted her hand. Heads turned, some scoffing, some curious. The clerk behind the desk raised an eyebrow when she signed her name on the dotted line, marking the $750 closing bid with a shaky pen that felt heavier than a ton of bricks. She could feel the heat of judgmental eyes on her, the weight of everyone thinking she was throwing money away. Her father's shop, boarded-up windows, warped doors, and a sagging roof, now officially hers. Yet it looked like a punishment more than an opportunity. The smell of rust and old coal filled the air as she accepted the key from the clerk, the metal cold and unfamiliar in her fingers. A man at the back muttered, "Good luck with that piece of junk," before standing and walking out, leaving the room strangely silent. On the table, the deed bore a faint smudge near the parcel number, as if someone had tried to alter it, and she noticed the key itself didn't match any of the locks exactly. A subtle reminder that the place had been tampered with long before she arrived. Driving the Explorer through the pouring rain toward the blacksmith shop, the wipers struggling against the downpour, she kept one hand on the wheel and the other holding the key and deed close to her chest, her pulse quick with fear and determination. Every pothole and puddle seemed to echo the ridicule and doubt she had faced her whole life. Yet as the dark silhouette of the abandoned shop emerged through the mist, a small, unspoken hope flickered. The property everyone had laughed at, called worthless, and ignored, had waited for her all these years. She parked in front, hands trembling slightly, and for the first time in days, the rain seemed to soften against the corrugated walls, as if acknowledging that this derelict place might be more than ruin, it might be a beginning. The moment she pushed the warped door open, it screamed like it hadn't been touched in years, a long metallic groan swallowed by the rain behind her. Inside, the blacksmith shop felt less like a building and more like a sealed memory left to rot. Air thick with oil, burnt iron, and wet wood that had soaked through seasons of neglect. Her flashlight cut a thin beam through the darkness, revealing a counter covered in dust so thick it had turned gray. A faded calendar still hanging on the wall frozen at October 2009, and a cracked coffee mug sitting upside down like someone had left in a hurry and never came back. The floorboards creaked under her weight, each step echoing deeper into the hollow space, as if the structure was breathing through its broken ribs. She set her small cardboard box down carefully near the entrance, the sound too loud in the silence, and pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders against the cold that seemed to rise from the concrete itself. For a moment, She just stood there, listening. No traffic, no voices, only the distant drip of water falling somewhere inside the walls. She tried her phone once. No signal. Then again. Nothing. The screen's glow made her hands look even more fragile than they already felt. She moved toward what must have once been the main workbench, its surface still marked with dark rings of oil and burn scars from tools long gone. On a hook beside it hung a single leather glove, stiff with age, and beneath it, a faded photograph half stuck to the wall. Her father standing beside the forge, face smudged with soot, smiling in a way she hadn't seen in years. The sight tightened something in her chest, but she didn't stop moving. Survival came first. She checked the breaker box. Dead. No power. She checked the sink. Dry, rusted shut. In the corner, she found an old metal cabinet slightly ajar. Its door bent as if forced open once before and never properly closed again. She knelt beside it, counting what little she had left in her mind. 2 cans of soup, a bottle of water, pain medication, and a flashlight battery already blinking low. This was not a place to live, but it was the only place she had. She dragged an old tarp from a pile near the wall and spread it over a relatively dry patch of floor, then lowered herself slowly, wincing as her injured leg protested the movement. As she settled, her flashlight beam swept across the far wall and stopped. A section of wood paneling near the back didn't match the rest. It was newer, too clean, almost deliberately replaced, with nails that looked recent compared to the rusted chaos around it. She stood again, limping slightly as she approached it, pressing her hand against the surface. It didn't sound solid. Behind it was something hollow. And then, from somewhere deeper inside the structure, a sound answered her touch. A faint metallic click, like something shifting that should have stayed still. She crouched on the damp concrete floor, dragging the thin tarp over a low patch of leaks in the corrugated metal roof. The edges weighted down with bricks she found in a forgotten corner. Each movement sent a spray of dust into the air, clinging to her damp jacket and settling on her hands, already cracked and raw from weeks of weathering rain and cold. The flashlight in her teeth illuminated shards of glass on the counter, and she moved slowly, sweeping them carefully into a small dustpan, mindful not to cut her fingers on the rusted edges. She found a roll of duct tape tangled with frayed rope and used it to hold a sagging door shut, the sticky strands resisting but holding just enough to keep the wind from swinging it wide open. An old ceiling bulb flickered above, and she twisted it gently, the warm yellow light casting long shadows over the warped floorboards as the rain beat against the roof in a steady rhythm. In the corner, she set up her camping stove, the hiss of the small flame filling the silence, and boiled water for tea, counting the remaining pills in her bag and measuring each one carefully. She moved to a locker dented on one side and found the handle loose. A faint scratch along the frame suggested it had been forced before, but no one had replaced it properly. On a shelf above, a receipt slipped from beneath a pile of yellowed newspapers. It bore a name she didn't recognize and a date only 3 weeks ago. Ink still dark, as if someone had passed through recently. Her hands shook slightly as she picked it up, placing it on the counter alongside her folded deed, trying to rationalize it as a delivery or a misfiled bill. Yet her gut told her it didn't belong here. She pried up a floorboard near the back wall, the wood creaking under the pressure, revealing a hollow space beneath, but she hesitated, covering it again, unsure of what she might uncover and whether she had the strength to face it. She pressed her palm to the dusty workbench, noticing a small key had fallen from a crevice, the metal cold and heavy in her hand, one she didn't remember seeing before. Outside, the rain pattered steadily, each drop echoing through the empty shop, mingling with the hiss of the stove and the faint clatter of tools. She moved with care. As she adjusted a plastic sheet over a broken window, her flashlight caught the edge of something protruding under a pile of scrap metal, a shape angular and deliberate, hidden but unmistakable. Her pulse quickened. She realized slowly, with that sinking mix of awe and fear, that in tidying the remnants of her father's shop, she was brushing against a secret someone had deliberately concealed, a presence waiting just beneath the surface. The key in her palm still felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried more than just rusted metal, and she was still staring at the shape half hidden under scrap when a voice came from the doorway. calm but roughened by years of dust and weather. "You're not supposed to be here alone at night." She turned quickly, flashlight cutting through the dark, revealing an older man standing under the broken frame of the entrance, holding a paper grocery bag in one hand and a small toolbox in the other. His jacket was faded navy, the kind worn by someone who had spent too many winters fixing things that other people gave up on. He didn't step closer at first, just looked at the space like he already knew every crack in it. "I saw the light from the road," he added, lifting the bag slightly. "Figured somebody stubborn finally came back for this place." He set the groceries down without asking permission. Bread, canned soup, a bottle of water, and then pulled out a small work light, plugging it into an extension cord that she hadn't noticed running along the wall. The shop brightened in uneven patches, revealing even more of its damage, but somehow it felt less like a ruin now and more like a place refusing to die. She watched him carefully, still holding the key. "Did you know my father?" she asked. The man hesitated just long enough for it to matter. "I knew of him," he said finally, tightening a screw in the breaker box with practiced hands. "Everyone around here did." He flipped a switch, and to her surprise, a single overhead light flickered alive for a second before stabilizing weakly. "He fixed things people didn't want to admit were broken," he continued, not looking at her now. "Including people." She stepped closer, placing the key on the counter beside the ledger page she had found earlier. "This key was here," she said. "Inside the floor. That doesn't feel like accident." At that, the man paused, eyes narrowing slightly. Not at her, but at the object. "That shouldn't still be there," he muttered almost to himself. He reached into his toolbox and pulled out a small metal bracket, worn smooth at one edge. The moment she saw it, something clicked. Its shape matched a faint imprint near the hidden panel she had discovered earlier. "Your father used to let me borrow tools," he said quietly. "But he never borrowed from anyone." A long silence followed, filled only by the hum of the weak light and the rain tapping the roof. Then he added softer, "After that night, nobody came back the same way again." She didn't let the question escape yet, but her eyes followed his glance toward the back wall where the hollow sound still lingered beneath the boards. He noticed her looking. "You're standing on more history than wood," he said almost gently. "Just don't rush what he spent years hiding." As he turned to leave, she caught sight of something tucked inside his toolbox. A faded photograph slipping from the edge, showing her father standing beside this very shop, with a group of people she didn't recognize but who looked like they trusted him. The man stopped at the doorway, not turning back, and said one last thing, quiet enough that it almost got lost in the rain. He didn't leave this place to be empty. And with that, his gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary, as if confirming something he had waited a long time to see, before adding under his breath. He left it for whoever was still willing to listen. The moment the old man disappeared into the rain, the shop felt different again. Not empty, but aware, as if it had just been reminded that people still remembered it. The faint work light he had left behind buzzed softly, casting uneven shadows across the blacksmith floor, and she stood there for a long time, listening to the building instead of moving. Then she noticed it. The panel on the back wall, the one she had touched earlier, wasn't just different in color anymore. Up close, the paint wasn't just newer. It was deliberately layered, brushed to match the old wood but failing in the corners where the edges revealed a cleaner cut beneath. She crouched slowly, placing her hand on the floorboards again, and this time she felt it too. A slight slope, almost imperceptible, like the structure had been adjusted rather than built. She pulled out the small screwdriver from the toolbox the man had left behind and tapped lightly along the wall. The sound changed near the center, solid, then hollow, then almost metallic. Outside, the rain softened for a moment, replaced by a low wind pressing under the door like a breath. She shifted to the side, dragging an old metal cabinet away from the wall with a scrape that echoed too loudly in the quiet. Beneath it, the floorboards were newer, cleaner, their nails placed with more precision than the rest of the shop, and one board had a faint gap along its edge, barely wide enough for a blade. She pressed the flashlight closer, tracing the seam, then compared it instinctively with the photograph she had found earlier, the one of her father standing near this same wall. In the photo, there had been a faint mark behind him, something like a vertical line in the wood that she hadn't noticed before. Now she saw it again in real space, a matching line. Her breath tightened. She knelt, using the screwdriver tip to probe the gap, but it resisted at first, as if sealed from below rather than above. She tried again, firmer this time, and the wood shifted with a soft click that didn't belong to natural aging. A loose screw rolled across the floor and stopped near her boot, and in that small sound she heard something else. A faint mechanical echo behind the wall, like something unlatching deeper inside. She paused, listening. The radio the old man had left behind suddenly crackled in the corner. Though no one had touched it, a burst of static filling the air for a few seconds before fading back into silence. She stood slowly, scanning the room. The wiring he had fixed earlier ran along the base of the wall, and then disappeared exactly where the panel began. That wasn't random. That was directed. She followed it with her eyes, tracing it again, slower this time until she saw it. A slight indentation in the panel, almost invisible unless the light hit it just right. Not a crack, not damage, a deliberate pressure point. And below it, faint but undeniable, a set of numbers etched so shallowly into the wood they looked like they had been hidden under years of dust on purpose. Her fingers hovered just above them, not touching yet, as the realization settled in that the wall wasn't just repaired. It was designed to hide something behind it. Her fingers hovered over the etched numbers in the wood, the faint sequence barely visible under layers of dust and time, and for a moment she didn't breathe, as if even the air might disturb whatever had been sealed behind that wall. Then she pressed the screwdriver into the edge of the panel again. The wood gave slightly, just enough to confirm it wasn't structural but intentional. A hidden seam, a deliberate break in the blacksmith shop's history. She shifted her weight, bracing her knee against the floor, and worked the screwdriver deeper into the gap until a soft, resisting crack echoed through the wall like something exhaling after years of silence. The panel loosened, not all at once. First the top corner, then the side, until finally she pulled it free with both hands, revealing a cavity carved into the structure itself. Inside was a metal lockbox, small, rectangular, dulled by age but untouched by rust, as if the wood had protected it from the world. Her flashlight beam hit the surface and revealed scratches along the edges, numbers etched into the lid that matched the sequence she had just seen outside. Her breath caught sharply as she lowered herself onto the floor, the cold seeping through her jeans, and she set the box in front of her like it might explode if held too long. The latch resisted at first, stiff from years of disuse, but then clicked open with a sound too clean for something so old. Inside was not treasure, not gold, not anything that matched the rumors of forgotten wealth, but a bundle of papers tied with frayed twine, a worn leather journal, and a folded envelope sealed with her father's initials pressed into faded wax. She picked up the journal first. The cover smelled faintly of oil and iron, the kind of scent that clung to hands that had worked for a lifetime. The first page contained dates, names, and entries written in her father's handwriting, careful, precise, but increasingly rushed toward the end. One name appeared more than once, M. Caldwell. The same name she had seen faintly scratched on the altered deed earlier. Her throat tightened as she flipped further, discovering numbers that didn't look like simple records. Payments, transfers, references to parcel alignment, and retention agreement, all tied to the exact address of the blacksmith shop. She stopped at one entry dated 6 months before her father's death. It read, "If anything happens to me, the lockbox stays sealed until she returns." Her hand went still on the page. She closed the journal slowly, then reopened it, as if expecting the words to change. They didn't. The envelope came next. The wax seal cracked under her thumb, brittle as old bone, and inside was a single folded document. A deed, but not the one she had seen before. This one listed the property under her name, dated 12 years earlier. Her vision blurred slightly as she read the signature line at the bottom, where her father's name sat beside hers in ink that had faded unevenly, as if rewritten over time but never erased. She sank back against the wall, the lockbox resting open in her lap, the journal still warm from her hands, and carefully folded the deed again. Not because she understood it, but because she didn't want to drop it before she did. And as she turned the page once more, one final line at the bottom of the ledger caught the light. Ownership transferred to same bloodline as original keeper. She sat on the cold concrete floor of the blacksmith shop, the lockbox still open in her lap, the journal resting against her thigh like it had weight beyond paper, and for a long time she didn't move, only read the same line again and again as if repetition might unlock meaning. Ownership transferred to same bloodline as original keeper. Her father's handwriting curved slightly upward at the end, like a signature that refused to fully settle. Outside, the rain softened into a steady, patient rhythm against the roof, no longer violent, almost like it was waiting with her. She turned another page, then another. The entries stopped being just numbers and dates and started becoming fragments of a life she had never been told about. Receipts stapled between pages showed grocery runs from a diner 3 miles away, paid in cash, always in small amounts. A hospital bill marked, assisted payment waived. A handwritten note tucked inside a folded ledger sheet. Mrs. Alvarez, keep heater on until repair is done. Do not charge her. Her fingers lingered on that line longer than the others. It wasn't business. It was care. Quiet, unrecorded care. The man from earlier, the one who left groceries and didn't ask questions, returned briefly at the edge of her memory. He fixed things people didn't want to admit were broken, including people. Now those words felt heavier. She flipped further and found names written repeatedly in the margins. Families she didn't recognize, small debts marked cleared, addresses crossed out and rewritten, as if someone had been tracking lives instead of inventory. Then she saw it, her father's name next to another M. Caldwell. Under it, a series of entries marked pressure notice, acquisition, attempt, refused signature. Her throat tightened. The handwriting shifted slightly in those sections, more tense, more controlled, like someone writing while being watched. She looked up instinctively at the empty shop around her, as if expecting the walls themselves to respond. The old man's toolbox lay near the counter where he had left it, and inside, half hidden under a cloth, she noticed a small cassette recorder. It hadn't been there before, or maybe she just hadn't seen it. Her hands hesitated before pressing play. The machine clicked, then filled the air with a low, uneven hum, tape stretching through time, catching on itself. A voice came through, worn but unmistakably her father's. If this is playing, then I didn't get to finish what I started. A pause. Static. Then, they think this land is empty. It isn't. It never was. Her breath caught. The voice continued, softer now, almost as if speaking to someone in the room with him. I kept records because I couldn't keep promises out loud. Not while Caldwell was still circling. The name landed like a stone. She glanced down at the ledger again. Same name, same tension in the ink. The tape crackled again. She doesn't know yet, her father said, and for the first time his voice changed. Less like a record, more like grief held too long. But she will come back here. I made sure of it. Her hand froze mid-page. She didn't realize he meant her until the next line in the ledger caught her eye. One she had skipped before, hidden under a smear of ink. A date of her childhood, a medical visit, her name written beside it in careful handwriting, followed by a notation. Protected under trust clause. The cassette clicked softly as if reaching its end, but before it stopped, one last sentence slipped through, barely audible. I never left her out of this. I just had to keep her out of sight until it was safe. The tape stopped. Silence returned heavier than sound. And as she sat there in the dim light of the shop, holding the ledger tighter than before, she realized the most unsettling part wasn't what her father had hidden, but that her name had been in his records long before she ever stepped back through the door. The cassette clicked out of silence, but the silence that followed it was different now. Heavier, charged, like the air itself had learned a new secret and didn't know where to put it. She sat still for a long time, the ledger open across her knees, pages trembling slightly every time the wind pushed through the broken wall seams. Her father's voice still lingered in her mind, especially the words, "She will come back here," not as memory anymore but as instruction. A direction written into her life before she even knew she was part of it. The next morning, she drove into town with the ledger sealed inside her jacket and the cassette wrapped in cloth on the passenger seat. The Ford Explorer rattling over potholes like it was protesting every mile. The county records office smelled like old paper and disinfectant. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as she waited in line behind property flippers and lawyers in pressed coats. When her turn came, she placed the parcel number from the deed on the counter. The clerk typed once, frowned, then typed again slower. She asked to see the historical chain of ownership. The ledger pages she showed were photographed, compared, scanned. The clerk's expression shifted. Not surprise, but recognition, like someone remembering something they were not supposed to remember out loud. "This file," the clerk said quietly, "should have been closed years ago." That sentence made her stomach tighten more than any eviction notice ever had. On a second monitor, the property map appeared, Blacksmith shop parcel highlighted, but surrounded by an unusual notation. Easement protection, historical labor designation, and something else partially redacted. Mineral rights, community trust linkage. Her breath caught. None of that had been mentioned in the auction listing. She stepped outside into the cold air, opening the ledger again on the hood of her car, aligning the handwritten notes with what she had just seen. Every entry her father made suddenly stopped looking like maintenance records and started reading like legal defense. Protection filings, disputed acquisition attempts, rejected buyout offers from a single recurring entity, Caldwell Development Group. The name now felt less like ink and more like pressure. Her phone rang before she could process it fully. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. A man's voice, polished, calm, practiced. "Ms. Walker, we're only trying to help you understand what you've inherited." She didn't respond. "That property is structurally unsafe," he continued. "It has no practical market value. You're holding documents that may confuse ownership, not clarify it." The phrasing was too precise, too rehearsed, like he already knew what she had seen. When she hung up, she noticed a black SUV parked across the street that hadn't been there when she arrived. Engine running. No plates she could read clearly. Back inside the ledger, she found one more page she hadn't noticed before, partially stuck to the inside cover, bearing a stamped county seal and a handwritten note from her father. "If Caldwell returns before she understands this fully, they will try to buy it for less than it is worth. Not in money, but in what it protects." Her fingers tightened around the paper. The cassette in the passenger seat suddenly felt heavier than before, as if it was waiting for the next step to complete its message. And as she looked up, she saw the clerk from earlier standing at the office window, staring directly at her through the glass, holding a copy of the deed she had just submitted, now marked with a red flag stamp she was never supposed to see. The black SUV was still there when she returned to the blacksmith shop, its engine running like it had decided not to leave until something inside her broke. She didn't go in immediately. Instead, she sat in the driver's seat, the ledger pressed against her chest, the cassette recorder wrapped in cloth beside her, watching the shop door as if it might open on its own. 10 minutes later, it did. Two men stepped out first, no urgency, no threat in their posture, only certainty. Then the woman from the county office appeared behind them, holding a folder thick enough to feel like a verdict. When she finally walked inside, the air inside the shop felt colder than the rain outside. The woman didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "We've reviewed the historical designation on parcel 47-092, she said, placing the folder on the counter like it already belonged there. "There appears to be a clerical inconsistency regarding ownership transfer dates." The words were soft, but each one carried weight like steel pressed into paper. A man in a tailored coat, Caldwell Development Group, she now recognized from the documents, spoke next, tone measured, almost sympathetic. "This property is valuable, but it's also structurally unsafe. For everyone's safety, we're prepared to offer a buyout before enforcement action is required." He slid a document across the counter. "Purchase agreement, already filled, already waiting for her signature. The number at the bottom large enough to look generous to someone who didn't know what had been buried here. "It's for the family's benefit," he added. That word, family, landed wrong in the space between them. Her jaw tightened. Behind him, the clerk from earlier avoided her eyes, flipping through copies of her deed as if searching for something that would justify what was already being decided. "There's also a compliance issue," the county woman continued, tapping another page. "Structural modifications were made without recorded permits. If unresolved, we may have to issue a temporary seizure order until ownership is clarified." Seizure. Temporary. Clarified. Every word was dressed in procedure, but none of it felt neutral. She looked down at the papers. The same parcel number. The same shop. But now there was a second copy of the deed attached. One she had never seen before. The signature line at the bottom was hers. Or at least it looked like hers. Slightly off. The curve of the letters too smooth, like someone had practiced remembering her hand instead of knowing it. Her pulse slowed instead of spiking. That was new. She didn't speak. She simply pulled out her phone and took a photo of the page. Then another. Caldwell's representative noticed but didn't stop her. He only smiled slightly. "We understand this is a lot," he said. "That's why we're trying to resolve it before it becomes complicated." The old man's voice from days earlier echoed in her memory. He never borrowed from anyone. She reached into her coat and felt the cassette recorder still there, heavier now than before. She didn't pull it out. Not yet. Instead, she slid the ledger forward on the counter, opened to the page that listed Caldwell Development Group repeatedly, then quietly closed it again and placed it in her bag. "We'll give you until Friday," the county woman said finally, placing a stamped notice beside the purchase offer. "After that, enforcement begins." As they turned to leave, the developer paused at the door, glancing back at the shop like it was already empty. "It's a shame," he said politely. "This place was never meant to stay in one's hands for long." And then they were gone, engine fading down the road, leaving only the sound of rain and paper shifting on the counter. But when she looked at the notice they had left behind, she saw something new at the bottom corner. An audit stamp dated 2 weeks earlier, with one witness signature listed underneath. The same county clerk who had refused to meet her eyes. And now she understood this wasn't just about ownership anymore. It was about who had been quietly signing the story long before she ever returned. The county boardroom smelled like polished wood and old paper, the kind of place where decisions were made long before anyone in the room fully understood their consequences. She stood at the back, holding a single folder against her chest, while Caldwell Development's representative spoke calmly at the front. His voice smooth as if nothing had ever been taken from anyone here. "We are simply requesting enforcement of standard safety and ownership clarification protocols," he said, placing a stack of documents on the table. "The structure has undocumented modifications and disputed transfer history." A few board members nodded without looking up. Then she stepped forward. No raised voice. No interruption. Just movement. She placed the ledger on the table first. Then the cassette transcription. Then the deed copies she had photographed the night before. The room did not react immediately. It didn't need to. It was the sequence that mattered. The first shift came when the clerk from the county office, who had been sitting quietly at the side, was asked to confirm the audit stamp. Her hand hesitated above the document before touching it. "Yes," she said finally. "That signature is mine." The room changed shape in that moment. Not loud, just still. Caldwell's representative smiled lightly. "Clerical oversight," he said. "These things happen in older property records. It doesn't change the underlying condition of the asset." He pushed forward the purchase agreement again. "We are offering to resolve this fairly, for everyone's benefit." Then she played the cassette. The room filled with her father's voice, crackling but steady, describing parcel protection, undisclosed transfers, and names that matched exactly what the ledger had recorded. The developer's smile didn't disappear immediately, but it stopped moving. The sound of the tape made even the air feel occupied. She opened the ledger next, flipping to the pages marked with Caldwell's repeated attempts. and placed her finger on a line that tied the shop to a protected community labor designation. A retired maintenance worker from the town, who had quietly been invited as a witness after recognizing the name, stood slowly. "I remember that," he said. "We were told never to question it. But your father paid for 3 families' housing when the mill shut down." That sentence hit harder than any legal argument. Caldwell's attorney leaned forward. "That's anecdotal," he said quickly. "We're here to discuss enforceable documentation, not memory." But then the clerk slid another paper forward, an original county survey map, dated years earlier, showing a protected easement overlay that matched the ledger exactly. And beneath it, a stamped amendment filed but never publicly recorded. The attorney reached for it, then stopped. His hand hovered above the page, not touching it. "This," the clerk said quietly, "was never supposed to be missing from the record." The developer's expression finally shifted. Not anger, not fear. Calculation breaking into uncertainty. He looked at the ledger again, then at her. "Even if this is valid," he said carefully, "you don't have the means to maintain what this property requires." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she placed one final photograph on the table. Her father standing beside the shop with the same people from the faded image, all of them holding signed papers, all of them behind the same door she had opened in part 4. The room went silent in a way that no procedure could override. The pen in the developer's hand stopped mid-air above the purchase agreement. No one spoke for several seconds, and in that silence, the ownership of the story shifted before the law even caught up to it. And as she looked down at everything spread across the table, the ledger, the deed, the recording, the map, she realized the question was no longer whether the shop belonged to her father, or to Caldwell, or to the county, but what she was going to do with a truth that could no longer be put back inside the walls. The silence in the county boardroom didn't break. It settled. It became something heavier than words, something that pressed against the walls and forced everyone to sit a little straighter in their chairs. The developer finally lowered his hand. The pen touched the paper, then stopped again, hovering like it had forgotten how to move. Then the clerk spoke softly, almost unwillingly. "This isn't a disputed property anymore." She looked at the ledger again, then at the cassette still sitting on the table. "This is a protected historical trust with verified transfer lineage." That sentence didn't sound dramatic. It sounded final, like something that had already been decided long before today. The attorney for Caldwell tried once more, but his voice had changed now. Less certainty, more caution. "Even if that's true," he said, "ownership without maintenance capacity creates liability. The county cannot." He stopped mid-sentence when an email notification chimed on the board's projection screen. One of the officials turned pale, clicked it open, and read silently. Then again, slower. "The state registry has just updated," he said. "The petition filed by Caldwell Development for emergency acquisition review has been denied pending fraud investigation." No one reacted immediately. It was too clean, too procedural, too irreversible. The developer exhaled slowly, like someone realizing too late they had been holding the wrong story. For the first time, he didn't look at the documents. He looked at her, really looked, not as a problem to be solved, but as something that had already outlived his version of events. The clerk slid another sheet forward. "The original deed correction has been validated," she said. "Ownership reverts to the named beneficiary under trust clause." Her name was there, not as an accident, not as correction, as confirmation. She didn't move at first, not because she didn't understand, but because she did, completely. The weight of years she had been excluded from this story didn't disappear. It settled into something steadier. The maintenance worker who had testified earlier spoke again, quieter now. "Your father didn't just leave land," he said. "He left places people could stand when everything else got taken." The developer gathered his papers slowly, no longer arguing, no longer negotiating. "We'll comply with the ruling," he said, voice stripped of its earlier polish. It wasn't defeat. It was removal. A system stepping back because it had finally been seen clearly. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped. The air felt washed, almost unfamiliar in its stillness. She returned to the blacksmith shop that evening alone. The key turned in the lock differently now, not like resistance but like recognition. Inside, the same space that once felt hollow now held weight. Not of secrets, but of meaning. She placed the ledger on the workbench, not hidden, not guarded. The cassette rested beside it. The deed was no longer something she held tightly. It was folded neatly in a drawer that finally belonged to her. The first thing she did was open the door fully. Not to search, not to uncover, just to let light in. A neighbor walked by later that night and paused at the threshold, seeing the light inside. "I didn't know someone was here," he said. She nodded. "I am," she replied. The next morning, a small hand-painted sign leaned against the front post. Open, not because everything was fixed, but because it no longer needed to stay closed. And as sunlight moved across the old wood, catching the edges of the worn key still hanging near the counter, it no longer looked like something that had been forgotten. It looked like something that had been waiting, patiently, quietly, for the right hands to remember what it was for.